Hello, my name is Maria Conti, and I'm a writing instructor at Kent State University and also a Walsh grad. And I was a tutor in the Academic Support Center for 3 years. I'm here to kind of give some training and some advice for the best way to run a tutoring session and use some research about writing centers to back that up. Today, I'm going to be using the Bedford Guide for Writing Tutors, and you can find the information for this, the citation for this, at the end of this module or below it. It's by Lee Ryan and Lisa Zimmerelli, and it's in the 5th edition, and it's one of the best resources for writing tutoring. Anytime I'm going to refer to Ryan and Zimmerelli, that will be this book. So first, this section will be on getting your tutoring session set up. First of all, you should make sure to sit side by side with your student, because it's not an office, you're not directing something, and you're not the manager of someone who's coming into your office sitting across from you. Ryan and Zimmerelli note that this is important to set the tone of the session, that you're co-collaborators on this paper and you're working together. I always begin each session by introducing myself and stating what major I'm in, and asking a little bit about the student. You want to know the student's name, major, and if the student plays in any sports or clubs. That always helps to break the ice. Otherwise, you just jump right into business and it looks like you're just a really strict tutor. So you want to even try to work in some examples, maybe if you're showing sentences later on in the session, about what the student is doing. Sports examples or something like that if you need to make up a sentence later on. If I worked with a student before, I might ask how the previous paper went. Never ask the grade, of course, but you might just ask how it went, the final copy of it. And then I always remind the student, especially if it's a new student, that he or she can always stop me and ask questions throughout the session. This usually relaxes them and makes them feel as if they can ask questions, so I won't be offended or upset that they interrupted me. In fact, I say, the best students stop me and ask questions, so that really promotes that. Number 2, the next thing you want to do after you do the introductions and small talk is always ask for the rubric or the assignment sheet. Often you get a blank stare. You might want to explain what this is. The sheet that your teacher gave you that details what you need for this assignment. And that's really important because A, not a lot of students look at that after the class where the teacher distributed it. And B, a lot of students will bring in an answer to the prompt that does not answer the prompt. So your job as a tutor is to make sure the student has interpreted the assignment correctly and to get them back on track if they haven't. So to do that, you need it straight from the rubric. It's best not to rely on student summaries of what the teacher wants. Ask the student to paraphrase what he or she must do as you're glancing over the rubric. This is important because if an assignment calls for an argumentative paper and the student has written equally for both sides of an argument, it's not going to likely pass, as is. If the student needs to pull up the rubric online, it's worth spending the extra few minutes it might take the student to log on to the computer to do that. Number 3, ask for the previous comments of the teacher on this paper or others for the course. Sometimes a student will bring all their papers in one folder from that course, and you can see what the professor marked earlier or what weaknesses the student might have that are recurring. Look for teacher pet peeves especially. And number 4, the session goal. It's important to lay out what the student would like to work on for the session. Sometimes the student has a clear idea of what he or she would like to work on, sometimes not, but it's important to at least give them the opportunity to make that clear to you. It avoids a lot of frustrations at the end of the session. So some students are required to come, some might just come to the center on their own. Some have not a very clear idea of what they want, and they might just say they want their paper edited, proofread, or fixed, are words they might use. But you want to distinguish with the student the difference, or at least with yourself, the difference between global revision and local revision. And global revision involves long-term kind of big changes to the document. So you want to look at organization, content included or excluded. That would be like the scope of the assignment. And you want to also look at bigger things such as the structure. If the assignment answers the prompt is another global revision that the student might need to have. Conversely, sentence level revisions or local revisions are what most students refer to when they're asking for their paper to be fixed. they know about grammar and punctuation and consistency and mechanical changes, but oftentimes students are unaware of the global revisions that may be even more important for the grade, for their class, and are definitely more important for their learning. Often writers are not even aware global revision is a possibility. The tutor needs to determine in this case that global revision is needed. In the case of large-scale global revision that's needed for a paper, only correct a few sentence level errors and focus on errors that are patterns. So if you see a lot of misused commas connecting two complete sentences, just focus on that one and have the student work through that one. There's no sense in editing using small local sentence level revisions, something that might be edited later, again for taking out a whole paragraph or adding in a new paragraph in terms of global revisions. So make sure you're addressing the global big things before you're addressing the smaller things. You should list patterns of error on a separate sheet of paper, especially sentence level errors, so the student could go back to that and make the changes to the rest of the paper if you don't have time to find all of them. Ask when the paper is due to determine the goals for that session. If the student needs to turn it in say 1 hour, you definitely want to focus on the sentence level revisions as well as the global revisions, and you might want to focus a little bit less on the global because say the student won't have time to finish that by the end of the session. If the paper is due that same day, you want to treat it that same way. They may not have time after your session to do much more than a few sentence level changes. Let the student know what you are skipping in the interest of time so that he or she can be aware of it for next time. And that's a tip from Ryan and Zimmerelli, so that the student knows there are other things that could have been done if he or she would have come into the session earlier. Number 5, decide how you will approach the paper. You can either assess the strengths and weaknesses of the paper as you go along, or you can ask for a minute or two to skim the paper and just kind of have the writer wait and review the pertinent errors that you see or the patterns of error that you see. Resist the urge, and this is very important, and this was hard for me as I was learning how to become a tutor because I wanted to mark everything. Resist the urge to mark every error you see. Students will be overwhelmed if you mark everything, and especially if you are really nitpicky about smaller things and then you also are directing them to bigger changes. They're not going to be able to distinguish the difference. So unless you have a paper that's very high level and you don't see a lot of global revisions, don't mark every error that you see. Students will be too overwhelmed.